Hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of Our Lewes. This is John Russell for Radio Lewes, and I've got my guest today, Matthew Homewood from Lewes History Group, and the ever-present Jane from Lewes History Group. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jane.
Good morning.
Now, Matthew, you've got a forthcoming talk at the History Group. Can you tell me a bit about it, please?
Well, it's entitled A Turbulent History of Pub Life in Lewes, and it's an amusing and entertaining but informative talk about really the social side of the history of Lewes. We all know a lot about the old buildings that were there, various events that went on, but there's little that's been written or talked about the average day-to-day life of the average person in Lewes. So I'm going to bring that to life a bit, really.
Is this all based on personal knowledge?
Well, unfortunately, I wasn't around 150 years ago, so I'm not able to have experienced all that. But most of my talk is based around the late 1800s, early 1900s, really.
And in a sort of brief synopsis of that, you know, we've got the pubs in Lewes today that we all know and love, and we all have our favourites. Our favourite brews, which should, of course, be Harvey's Best Bitter, but that's by the by. What's the big difference, would you say, between then and now? What are we looking at? The change, the big major change.
The major change is the number of pubs and beer houses in the town. In 1907, there was one pub for every 85 people in Lewes. There's now one pub for around every 1,000 people in Lewes. So if you're wandering around the town in 1907, 1906, and shortly before that, you'd basically come across a pub every 5 or 6 buildings. It's the equivalent now of having just around 100 pubs in Lewes with the amount of population we've got. So you can imagine, how many pubs there were to choose from. You imagine going out your door and you've got 100 pubs to choose from to go to. That is the major difference. It's just the number of beer houses, inns and taverns.
Well, I'm sure that figure forms the dreams of some of the pub goers of Lewes, but that is remarkable, isn't it? And the town itself would have been smaller, of course.
Yeah, I mean, 100 years ago, I mean, we weren't anything like half the size. We were a lot bigger than we are now, but there was about 11 or 12,000 people compared to, I think we're around 17, 18,000 now in Lewes. But as I say, they had around 66 pubs in the first decade of the 1900s, with, as you say, a lot fewer in population.
And when one goes about Lewes these days, it's quite possible to see some of those lost pubs, isn't it? I can think of just off the top of my head, immediately half a dozen pubs, that buildings that were pubs, some pubs that have closed down in my time in Lewes, and others like the Wheat Sheaf, the other one in South Street, which is now a private house next to the chip shop. I can't remember.
The Fountain.
The Fountain.
Yeah, closed in about 1972, I think.
Yeah. And other places that you think might have been pubs, like what is now Pastoral Antiques,
is that Priory Street?
No, that's in Malling Street, opposite the Dorset, more or less opposite the Dorset Arms.
There were many pubs in South Street and Malling Street, which obviously before the Phoenix Causeway was built and the tunnel.
That was the main road, yeah.
Well, Malling Street curled round and sort of joined South Street, and there were so many pubs down there. There was the Rock Inn, the Foresters, they've all gone, the Tanner's Arms, the Wheat Sheaf, of course, the Fountain. There were so many in that little area, so many of those places were pubs, actually, yeah.
And has your research shown why these pubs failed, and others, like the Dorset and the Snowdrop, and they've remained and are successful to this day? What's the difference between them and the pubs that failed?
Well, this is actually it's a great question, because this is exactly what I wanted to find out. And there have been so many great books out by historians such as Bob Cairns, Colin Brent, of course, Kim Clark. They've done many books that have shown photographs before and after, and there's a lot of old pictures that we can see before and afters, basically. and we're sort of bombarded with a lot of the old photographs of the old pubs, which are fantastic to look at. They really are. And so many have closed, and that was my question. Well, why have they closed? Why particularly these pubs? This is what I decided to investigate. And in 1907, as I said, in that first decade, there were so many pubs in Lewes. In 1907, they closed 12 pubs in one summer. The reason being, and these weren't midnight raids or anything, they didn't just sort of close them on one night. They had big meetings about it. They wrote to their licensees and the landlords, and they just said, look, we're really sorry, there are far too many pubs in this area, especially around Cliff, South Street and Morling. And they said, we just need to close some of these pubs. 14 were up for closure. 2 of them sort of survived that closure, one of them being the Gardener's Arms, which I'm sure a lot of people in Lewes would be immensely grateful for the landlady, Emma, at the time, who fought her corner and kept the Gardener's Arms open. But that was that's probably the most important time in the whole of Lewes pub history, is 1907, the big cull of Lewes pubs. And they were closed not because there was anything wrong with them. The King and Queen's Arms... the King and Queen, for instance, in Morling's St Pancras Road, was doing roaring trade, but it was just one of those pubs that was one too many, and it just had to go.
So when they were closed, this would have been the withdrawal of their licence from the magistrates, is that right? How did they close them? What was the closure mechanism?
Well, the licensee committee and the local police basically got together, and they said, look, something's got to be done, and they basically looked at maps of Lewes and had plotted where the pubs were, and there might be a collection of, say, 4 or 5 pubs in one area, and they'd sort of pick one, it seems, pretty much in the middle of that clump and just say, look, that's not needed. In February 1907, in the Sussex Express, the reporter quoted that once a public house loses its public need, it becomes a public nuisance, and at the earliest convenience it needs to be done away with, I think were the exact words he used. So that was the fear, that there was just too many pubs, too much drunkenness in the town as well. Yeah,
and there were general fears about the poor state of the health of the working man, weren't there, post-Boer War and the like. It was considered that people lived a dissolute life, which meant that they were... not fit for the cannons.
No, that's quite right. And the years leading up to 1907, it's very noticeable. The reports in the police court reports in the newspapers are full of sort of drunken behaviour and so being fined or imprisoned for drunkenness. And it was actually a good 50-50 of men and women. It wasn't the men necessarily that were predominantly the drunkards. Very much women as well, and some very amusing stories, basically, of drunkenness and what went on, and police carrying women home, basically, because they were literally lying in the street, rolling about, not being able to stand. And although they're very amusing, a lot of these stories, which I shall be sort of relaying in my talk, there is obviously a sad side to these, because a lot of these women were people's mothers, and wives, and probably just hit hard times. They hit the bottle, basically.
Yeah, and I think this so-called modern phenomena of binge drinking is actually as old as the hills, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. I think we're actually quite a sober nation compared to, if you read some of what was going on, whether it's 100 years ago or 500 years ago. I think there's no increase in drunkenness.
Well, I think the Normans themselves complained about the amount of booze the Anglo-Saxons put away, which made them unfit for guard duties and the like. So,
yeah.
Well, sorry, go on. You're going to say something.
I was going to say, it did all come to a head it was around 1902, 1903 that the workhouse, which was off De Montfort Road before it was dismantled in 1960, it became the reformatory for inebriated women. Which shows you how serious the authorities thought the problem was. And in Lewes, it was the Southern Counties Reformatory. It was housed at Lewes. I don't know how coincidental that was. But a lot of women, basically, if they'd been in court more than once or twice for drunkenness, another option to prison was going to this reformatory.
Right, well, that's interesting.
Yes, and there was many escape attempts, women sort of jumping over the walls, climbing
Doing
out of
a runner.
windows, and yes, basically running as a classic story of it's around 1906 of two women escaping and heading for the hills. They were, I think, trying to get to Brighton, and they were chased by one lone policeman who chased them up sort of towards Blackcap.
Last seen disappearing towards Brighton, the three of them hand in hand. Yeah.
That's right, and he did catch them and bring them back, and they were sent back to reformatory. But as I say, there's a sad side to this. They are quite amusing, a lot of these stories, but you think, these poor women who are, incarcerated sometimes up to 2 or 3 years in the reformatory, and probably leaving their children sort of behind to be looked after by someone else.
And of course this is a local story, but it is actually representative of the bigger national picture, isn't it? This isn't just happening in Lewes, it's happening all over the country.
That's right, and the big cull of pubs in 1907, it wasn't just Lewes. There were many places that were named, in just the Sussex Express report itself, and there were many other towns and villages around that also had the same problem of far too many pubs per head of population. The only one that beat Lewes was Rye, actually, that had something like one
that's
pub for every
embarrassing.
120 people or something.
We just weren't trying hard enough. Well, look, this sounds absolutely fascinating, Matthew, and I know the quality of the talks at Lewes History Group is fantastic. So give us the date and the time when you're giving your talk, please.
Well, it's Monday the 10th of June, kick-off at 7:30.
Kick-off, right?
Yep. And I should be talking for about 50 minutes to an hour with questions afterwards.
And that's at the meeting room in the King's Church.
That's right, King's Church building opposite home base.
Opposite home base. That's the easiest way to describe it. And there's plenty of parking, isn't there, all around there? That's not a problem.
No, not a problem at all.
Good.
Yeah, and it's, 10-minute walk from the train station, I think, something like that.
And obviously Lewes History Group is a members group. What does it cost non-members to come along? Non-members are welcome, of course.
Oh, yes. I've been to quite a few of the talks, obviously, myself, and, a lot of people, I think, that go are non-members, and it's just £3 at the door, basically.
So fantastic value for money.
It is, yeah.
Okay, well, I look forward to that. I hopefully will be able to come along to that myself. Now, we're also joined by Jane, who is in charge of the publicity supremo for Lewes History Group, and you brought in the new leaflet, which I'm very impressed with.
Oh, thank you very much, John.
A little fanfold leaflet.
We had the help of a designer up on the Neville called Lloyd Raworth.
Yeah, it's clean, clear and informative. You don't have to go looking for the information, it just jumps out of the page. It's very, very good. And some fascinating photographs there. You've got some from the John Davy collection and John Kay.
Yeah.
And the cover is that wonderful map of Lewes from is it the 18th century or is it slightly earlier than that? I can't remember now.
I can't remember the date offhand. Again, we used the map by kind permission of the Sussex Archaeological Society. There are so many, and I can't remember offhand which one this is. It's the James Edwards map.
Yes, it's great. And these will be available for people to pick up at the library, I take it?
Yes, at the library, at the tourist office. We've done quite an extensive list of where we're going to hopefully leave these leaflets so that people can find out more about us and come along either as a non-member or hopefully join us and maybe take part in our research project.
Now, you meet, as we've said when we're talking to Matthew, at the King's Church building, which is Brooks Road. And if anybody wants to look it up on Street View, it's BN72BY. It's by next door to home base. Plenty of parking. What time do the talks get going?
They're always start at 7:30 through to about 9 o'clock. They're always on the second Monday of every month, apart from August, where we don't have a meeting. And you can always find out more on our website, leweshistory.org.uk.
And are you on any of the other, the social medias?
Yes, we are indeed. We're slowly building up our following on Facebook. So there is, if you go to facebook.com/Lewes Lewes History Group. You'll find us there.